Okay, so the title of our talk is Bolsonaro, 𝗏𝗏corpus corpusnaro, and the reason for that is because we haven't still decided on a better name for the corpus. So if you can give your suggestions, they'll be welcome. Okay, and I've been conducting this study with my colleagues Marini, Larissa, and 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏. So, just an introduction. I mean, Brazilians need no introductions, but as we have people from all over the world. So just 𝗂𝗵𝗵𝗂 Bolsonaro, he started his military career in 1977, where he stayed up to 88, okay? He was always described by superiors as being aggressive, having like too much of an ambition for finances and better salaries. He's had at least two problems with the law. The first one was like he gave an interview to 𝗬𝗏𝗍 magazine complaining about salaries, and for that he was charged with 15 days in prison or something like that. And he was also charged for planting bombs in military units and for that he was acquitted by the Supreme Military Court. He served in the military for 15 years and he reached the rank of captain. So his political career started then in 1989. Rumor says that he wanted to keep being in the military army, but because of all the problems, he was not that welcome anymore. So he was a counselor for the Rio de Janeiro city for just 2 years, and then he ran for a congressman for the lower house, and where he stayed for 7 consecutive terms, okay? And it is in that specific period that our analysis will focus. And then since last year, he is the president of the country. So the objective of our talk is using corpus linguistic tools to analyze his speeches as a representative of the lower house. And we want to know what are the salient linguistic characteristics of each term, if anything changed, okay, throughout the 28 years, and what changed. So Bolsonaro's speeches and the way he talks has been attracting attention from the media and from different researchers. Okay, newspaper and magazines have written about his discourse and his use of language, saying that it's quite limited. And on the other hand, he says he uses the language of the people, and he is very good in the social media. And then we decided to look into it with more attention. Some of the previous studies about political discourses and currently is his related to the impeachment votes. Okay, we have 2 studies here. So from 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗂 and from 𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏. Okay, 𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗏 analyzed the impeachment votes related to God, nation, and family, and she presented here in the LAEL webinar. And then 𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗏 carried out this study related to fake news and Bolsonaro's Twitter. Cesarino studied digital populism in Brazil, and especially Bolsonaro's speeches, Bolsonaro's communication in Twitter. And not long ago, Jeff Egbert talked about Trump's style, his unique style for the presidency campaign. Okay, we are going to talk in the methodology. We compiled the corpus. We are going to say how we compiled the corpus, how we generated the keyword list, multi-word units, and how we coded these multi-word units. About the corpus. The corpus was manually downloaded from the lower house speeches database. So it is a database in which you just type the name of the representative, the lower house representative, and you get, as you can see here, 1 file per day, okay, in which the representative participated. So we had to download like thousands of files, And especially for the 10 first years, it was more difficult because they were in a kind of old PDF format. So it took us a lot of time to clean up the corpus so that it could be read by the software tools. So we compiled then 28 files, one for each of his years in the lower house. And then we grouped the 4 years of each term. So we came to 7 subcorpora, which were actually treated as different corpora here, okay, one per term. Well, it is a spoken corpus, but it's not a regular spoken corpus because stenographers record the representative speeches in a quite idealized manner. And then they reproduce the standard Portuguese, they dismiss filler, and they dismiss other characteristics of our interactions. But as our purpose was to analyze the content, so this was not a problem. Something else about these registers is that when recording these irregular or non-regimental expressions, before the stenographers can make it available for the public, when the expressions are irregular, they have to communicate the fact to the supervisors and to see what the supervisor will say. When the supervisors tell them to clean up the text, so we have something like that. 𝗕𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗏 𝗀𝗏, which means the text has been purified from these irregular expressions, okay? This was actually quite frequent in Bolsonaro's years in the lower house. Just for you to have an idea, so we have something here. The general secretary, and then of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, from both sides, and the kid gay, and then he said something which was cleaned, okay, and then he said, but let's not allow this coward act to enter the primary school. Well, about the size of the corpus, we have, as you can see, it's nearly 800,000 tokens. And the size varies along the term, from 132,000 in the first term, and then it drastically diminishes in the last term, okay, because he was already campaigning while receiving salary from the lower house. But it's very clear that he didn't participate as much. Well, the reference corpus then is also comprised of 28 files, one from each year. So what did we do? From the same years that we had Bolsonaro's speech, we extracted, we downloaded the speeches from other representatives, okay? And this reference corpus is 3 times larger than the study corpus, than Bolsocorpus. So how did we do about the keyword extraction? We used the sketch engine tool to extract the salient, statistically significant multi-word units from Bolsocorpus. For us, for it to be considered a multi-word unit and to be extracted, it had to have at least 5 occurrences in each term. Okay, so what we compared the study corpus of the first term, 1991 to 1994, to the reference corpus of 1991 to 1994. Okay, the reason for that was that we wanted the time effect to be mitigated. Otherwise, whenever some keywords would appear, not because they were actually more frequent in Bolsonaro's speech as compared to the other members, to the other representatives of the lower house, but just because of the time. It was like everybody was talking about that at the time. So if you compared something from 91 to 94 to something from 2000, we would this would come into play, and we didn't want it. Okay, so they were like the keywords were extracted from 7 terms separately. The study follows this corpus-assisted discourse study, which investigates and compares features of particular types of discourses. And we use a quantitative and a qualitative approach. So the quantitative was to analyze the large number of tokens, and the qualitative is like we went deeper into some items, which I'm going to explain later. More specifically, it follows this modern diachronic corpus-assisted discourse studies, which aims at revealing these changes that appear over time in language, social, political, and cultural issues. So what we did in the end was to compare Bolsonaro to Bolsonaro throughout the years, apart from, of course, the other representatives as well. So in the first extraction, this is the number of terms we got. And here you can also see that some years we had more terms. And in the last one, we have fewer multi-word units because, the corpus was much smaller in the last term. So roughly 280 of those multi-word units occurred in not at least 2 terms, but in 7 terms, and 1,300 appeared in in 2 terms, and this appeared in only 1 term. Okay, and these terms here, these multi-word units, they happen in 7 terms. So like years of age, Congresso Nacional, and military service, and army, okay, Brazilian people, and so on. Then we started coding. This first stage, the coding there were 3 stages of coding, and here I'm going to explain the first one. The first stage consisted in categorizing these multi-word units, regardless of text and concordance lines. Okay, so what we did, we analyzed just the terms. We downloaded the Excel sheet, and we analyzed and categorized the terms as they appeared in the Excel sheet. Okay, double coding was possible when the same unit, the same multi-word unit, belonged to more categories. Okay, the categories were decided after exhaustively reading all the occurrences many times. So these were the first categories after the first coding. We came to 20 of them, and some of them were more recurrent than others, but you can say like armed forces and police, place, association, and institution. I'm going to give some examples. Family planning, he talks a lot about birth control and sterilizing some people in the community. Position here is referred to like being a lawyer or something like that. So here's some examples. The main categories, okay. So we have some proper names, and here this one received double code. So if God allows, we'll have more success in Lula government than we had with Fernando Henrique Cardoso. So Fernando Henrique here received 2 codes because it was a proper name and a Brazilian president. And now it's funny to read that, but he says that he would never vote for José Serra because he preferred somebody honest, albeit not very cultured, but with good intention. About position, okay, this one also received double codes. We have here a coronel, and 𝗷𝗫𝗀𝗀𝗏 𝗂𝗏 also appeared in the impeachment vote, if you remember, because Coronel 𝗷𝗫𝗀𝗏 𝗂𝗏 used to torture people during the dictatorship, and so Bolsonaro continuously talked about him. So here, Coronel 𝗷𝗫𝗀𝗏 𝗂𝗏, and then he received double code as well, position and armed forces, and also proper name, actually, you know. And then place, association, institution. So whenever he mentioned a city or an institution, or remember that we were coding only multi-word units and not separate words. Armed forces and police. So we had the armed forces. very frequently. Legal matters plus punishment. So whenever he mentioned something related to laws and and here punishment, when he mentioned like reducing the legal right, the legal age for crime and things related to that. He also talked a lot about money financial issues, mainly to military salaries and financial compensation. So here he's saying that he's talking about this raise of 100%, okay, and a Brazilian president, he mentioned all of them a lot, okay, and like it's funny because it appears they all appear as keyword multiple word units, in spite of having other members from the same from the same days, okay, so it was not here. Also, just I'd like to draw your attention for this demarcation of lands, okay, this is going to appear later on. When then we from the most important categories, we looked at the normalized values, and here we saw that names had the highest normalized values, and position too, okay, but all of them decreased. So we wanted, we tried to see in a different way to find out why they were decreasing. And we saw the percentages of these previous categories in each term. And what we saw is that other categories started getting more. We started being more spoken about by Bolsonaro. Okay, so that's why in terms of normalized value we have less. So and here you can see money was very popular in his first. And things related to the salary of the armed forces mainly started decreasing his attention, which nearly nothing at the end, and also some other categories, even like armed forces too, and so on. What we saw then is 40% of the codes were related to people, either proper name or position. So we decided to further analyze all these multi-word units that had received this previous code: people, proper name, and position. For that, we had to work with our tables and manually clean the data, because then individually analyzing all the entries, we saw that, for example, 𝗁𝗏𝗏 received many different entries like Fernando Collor, President Collor, and President Fernando Collor. So what I did, is put all of them in the same cell and added the occurrences when they were not the same occurrence. And then we came to these numbers here. Okay, so again, 7th term, reduced number of multi-word units. And then what we saw is that he usually attributed some value to the names, to the people, okay? So we then started looking at the evaluative aspects of language. So how he related to feelings, how he assessed people, and of course, contrasting with other speakers. That's why we were looking at the key multi-word units and not all multi-word units. So the ones which are typical from Bolsonaro. And then we determined from the text whether the author was in favor, against, or neutral towards these people. Some linguistics have been paying attention to these aspects. So we have appraisal theory, stance, and others, but we followed these studies related to evaluation and corpus linguistics. Okay, so what Huffman and Thompson say is that evaluation is essentially one phenomenon and not the evaluation boils down to good and bad. Okay, and they say that it's mostly expressed through adjectives, but that was not the case in our corpus. We had to go beyond adjectives to see whether the reference was good or bad according to Bolsonaro's judgment. And then we came up with other questions. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? And if the good guys and bad guys were the same throughout the term. And then we came to the second coding. And then we coded, this time analyzing the concordance line of all 387 multi-word unit types. Here they are not 389 tokens, but the type. So for each one of the 389, we had to click and check the concordance lines, okay, to check if they were good and bad. And then we came to this table, which doesn't say much because, as you can see, sometimes he had more good guys, sometimes more bad guys, and sometimes more neutral. The neutral was usually when he was not talking about the person, but to the person. So, for example, Deputy 𝗬𝗪𝗖𝗦𝗍 𝗧𝗏𝗍 was the most recurrent neutral guy because he was the president of the lower chamber. So he always refers to him when he was talking about somebody else. And goodness and badness come in many different forms. So we use this binomial naming system to see why they were considered good and why they were considered bad. So it was binomial because it was like good because pleasurable, or bad because dangerous, good because profitable. And okay, this is not from Bolsonaro's speech, okay, this is from the authors, but we came to the third coding. So we had all the good and the bad ones, okay, and we wanted to get the categories of goodness and badness. And this is what we came, okay, from the good. They are good because of these reasons. I'm going to give some examples soon. And they are bad because of these reasons. Notice that they are good and bad, again, according to Bolsonaro, not according to our judgment. So, good. A person is good because it's against communists or against Cuba. So, here he mentions that two Cubans, like two Cuban guys, went to the lower house and looked for this representative from the right, even though Cuba is from the left, because they were like, they wanted freedom, okay? They were political prisoners. Or they were good because they were against election fraud. And election fraud here meant not having the written vote, okay? Or he's always been against the electronic ballot. So, okay, people are good when they are against the electronic ballot. Good because they don't fully support environmental regulations. So, he liked this 𝗷𝗂𝗍𝗪 𝗪𝗏 because she allowed to fish in 𝗬𝗪𝗀𝗧. This issue of fishing in 𝗬𝗪𝗀𝗧 has been coming like for years. Okay, he still talks about that, and he received a fine for fishing there, and so it's a big issue for him. Okay, and he's not a big supporter of environmental regulations, as we'll see later on. People are also good because they do not support LGBT or human rights. And so he mentions here Pastor 𝗪𝗪𝗪 because he's against this what he says is kind of a booklet, which campaigning against sexual violence in schools. And he's against telling kids or teaching kids to protect themselves against sexual violence. So, okay, so do not support LGBT, good people. People are also good when they are pro what he calls the military democratic revolution. We Brazilians call it the dictatorship. And then here he mentions the Brazilian population that misses March 31st was when the dictatorship started. And he loved Roberto Marinho. Roberto Marinho was the founder of our biggest TV station, the Rede Globo. And he always mentions when Roberto Marinho said that he was in favor of the revolution because of the preservation of democratic institutions. Later on, Roberto Marinho said he regretted saying that, but Bolsonaro never mentions that. And he mentions this talk of Roberto Marinho many times. Well, people are also good because they are victims. Okay, he has many subcategories of victims. In the beginning, in the first term, the victims were usually from military like institutions or civil servants who didn't get fair pay. But then it started changing. And then, like, he mentioned 𝗪𝗪, who was the mayor of a city nearby São Paulo, and who was from the Labor Party, but because he was murdered, and he mentions that he was murdered by somebody from the Labor Party, so he became a good victim. So victims were always good, according to Bolsonaro. So who killed 𝗪𝗪? Okay, so and he mentions 𝗪𝗪 many times. People are also good because they support birth control. Here, okay, he mentions the governor 𝗪𝗪𝗀 because he was in favor of sterilization and of also vasectomy. And then he never, whenever he can, he mentions his 3 sons who are also politicians. And this has become a category on its own because it's quite frequent. People are also good because they support weapons, death penalty, or the lowering of the age of penal majority. Here, for example, the reduction of, he congratulates, okay, Leonardo Picciani, who was the president of this committee, for that. And this was a very recurrent category. People were good because they support civil servants and armed forces. Actually, armed forces were like the key here. But then he ended up supporting civil servants like indirectly. And then he congratulated Luiza Erundina from the Labor Party many times, okay? She said that she was like, she's done a lot for the armed forces. And here, in this extract here, he talks about this Maria Laura, who mentioned that the government never spends as much as necessary with the civil servants. And like, as I said, this is a category on its own. Whenever he like compliments his sons, his family, okay, so, well, today is my son, Carlos Bolsonaro's birthday, and he was the youngest city council in the history of Brazil, and so on. Now the bad ones. The bad ones are the ones who don't support the armed forces and civil service. This, like when we started reading, we saw that many of the bad guys are from from authorities from the military institutions, okay? Usually the generals are bad guys because they don't do enough, or here this one prohibited soldiers or from voting, and this would harm his vote in Lula, okay, and would help 𝗪𝗪 get more votes. So he really like campaigned for Lula in the first election. here another example about 𝗬𝗂𝗍𝗂. He loved complaining about 𝗬𝗂𝗍𝗂 and Fernando Henrique and about the minimum salary. People were bad because they support this disarmament. Okay, so here he talks about 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗏 and it's related to 𝗬𝗏𝗟. So even though 𝗬𝗏𝗟 was murdered, people still defend disarmament and good people should be armed. And people are bad because they support the demarcation of indigenous land. He always says that our natives here, they receive too much land. And well, I don't have here, but he talked about the 𝗬𝗏𝗍𝗂 and some minerals that he still talks about. Okay, so here he wanted to have a land reform instead of giving land to the native people. And people were bad because they support corruption. And here he talks about the corrupt bankers that received money from the government and the 𝗷𝗂𝗶𝗃 𝗟𝗏. So for him, 𝗂𝗏 was the most corrupt person, okay, like at that time until 2001. And people were bad because they support Cuba, communism, and terrorism. So he talks, I mean, many times about Fidel Castro, 𝗁𝗵𝗂𝗂𝗀, and the Labor Party. And this is actually his main complaint about Dilma Rousseff. Whenever he talks, or not whenever he talks, but most cases when he mentions Dilma is to talk about her past life, in which he says that she was a terrorist, and that she belongs to this criminal institution, organization. People are also bad because they support environmental regulations. So here he talks and he says that Minister Licérgio hasn't done anything for the fishing in Angra dos Reis, and he talks about IBAMA. He hates IBAMA. IBAMA não é dono. It doesn't own that area. They are cowards. What they've been doing in Angra dos Reis because they want to protect the environment. And people are really bad because they support especially LGBT, but also human rights, okay, human rights activists. So we have Fernando Haddad, that he says that he named the Kid Gay Project. So according to him, Fernando Haddad was trying to teach kids how to be gay, okay? And there are many occurrences of that. And people are also bad because they are journalists. So he mentioned Miriam Leitão many times. The only journalist he liked was Roberto Marinho because he, according to Bolsonaro, he supported the military democratic movement. But so Miriam Leitão is, he didn't like, so she was bad just for being a journalist. Whatever journalists do, they're bad. And people are bad because they want to charge additional taxes. So here, 𝗓𝗏𝗃, who had this tax very similar to what Paulo Guedes wants to implement now. Well, now, in terms of quantity, what we have here against armed forces, okay? So what we can see that in his first term, all the bad guys were against armed forces, okay? Analyzing the names and the people. It was also high, and then you can see it started diminishing until it came to a 0 in the 7th term, right? On the other hand, the communists kind of replaced people who didn't like the armed forces. So it came very timidly here, but then it got really strong. Also, this category here, people who were for LGBT and human rights, it was, inexistent before, and it got really strong throughout the term. The good guys then didn't change as much, but so were people who who liked the armed forces, okay, And then, but here they were victims. Here were people who were for armed forces, and but also they started changing. But victims for him were always very good guys. He loved antagonizing and putting like a person or a group of people as victims whenever he spoke in plenary. So as what I said, okay, the ones, the good guys, the bad guys were first the ones who didn't support the armed forces or civil servants. Okay, for example, the first term they were 100%, and in the seventh term they were not mentioned, at least in the through our key analysis. The supporters of Cuba and communism and terrorism appeared only in the second term, but got stronger in the sixth, and was one of the two bad guys in the seventh term. The same happened to does not fully support LGBT and human rights activists. So, who are the good guys? The good guys were mainly victims, okay, and supporters of civil servants and armed forces. And these categories remained strong, but then we had an increase of does not fully support LGBT and human rights, and the pro-1964 military democratic revolution. Well, some of the findings. Okay, so he was first elected to speak on behalf of the armed forces, mainly in relation to salaries. In the same direction, he advocated for military's daughters and wives. Many times he said that the daughters had to keep receiving the military salary and the wives and so on. And he started speaking more fights, okay, as it became clear from like, ever since our first analysis, okay, which he had fewer categories, and then more categories came into play. So he kind of broadened, yes, his horizons. And a more detailed analysis of the concordance lines, it was also clear, okay, from these people's category. Here we can see that he was, from this vote, it kind of matches the number of categories he focused, because he started focusing more on many categories in 2010. And then he only had, and he had fewer votes. In 2014, he came to nearly, 4 times more votes than he had in 2010. And it was in this term here that he started, focusing on all these people. Also, okay, we have the we and them opposition strategy. Okay, this has been documented before, and this is very typical of populist politicians. Okay, when he moves from concrete enemies, right, from the more like alarmistic and conspiratory ones. Okay, and he also started defending family values wherever they are. All right, so he's never too clear about this defense of family values, but, and then because of that, he started attracting attention, okay, which could perhaps explain the increasing votes in 2014, because then he was not speaking only on behalf of the armed forces, but he was speaking on behalf of many more people. One absence which was noted was like the fight against corruption. This was not something marked in his speeches. I mean, not statistically as compared to his fellows. This was stronger in the second, third, and fourth term, and mainly in Fernando Henrique's government. Okay, and what's totally absent in the last term. However, when we looked at his government plan proposal, which had only 7,000 tokens, we have many occurrences of corruption. Okay, so like even though this was not such a big issue for him during his 7 terms, This was one of his flags, and a lot of people who voted for him voted because of the fight against corruption. But that was not his fight during the 7th term. Well, we concluded that modern diachronic corpus-assisted paradigm was useful, okay, and an efficient method to track changes in language, social, cultural, and political aspects, okay. And also, this evaluating the goodness and the badness was very appropriate to check Bolsonaro's point of view and help to understand what the kinds of fights he picked, okay, his targets in each one of the terms. Well, and now following Jesse's advice to Trump and Biden, we decided to give some recommendations for people who want to be successful populists. Okay, if you want to be a successful populist politician, that's what you should do. Broaden your horizons. Do not defend just one cause or one group of people. You have to substitute real opponents, for example, the ones who don't support the armed forces, for imaginary, intangible ones, Fidel Castro, 𝗂𝗵𝗂𝗏, 𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗀, and so on. Vaguely defend the family institutions from whatever imaginary group that wants to destroy it, okay? So he never mentions who wants to destroy the family. I mean, like the 𝗂𝗏𝗃 wants to destroy the family, but it was always very vague, okay? Make large use of the we-them opposition strategy, being we, always the good guys, okay, or the victims, and them, the really ugly boogeyman, okay, so the very bad guys. And this is for Brazilians, okay, above all, use no tocante a in relation to 10 times a year, okay, this is very typical of Bolsonaro's speeches even today, and it's been coming with him ever since 1991. And